So there's a new analysis out about how much money Capitol rioters, the MAGA insurrectionists, whatever you want to call them, had donated to Donald Trump and the Republican Party after he lost the election. No, we know that after Trump lost his re-election campaign, he started really going hard on his supporters for money. Now, that's not really too much different than there was before. However, during the campaign, a lot of these fundraising emails were pretty crazy, pretty out there, pretty aggressive, right? And after he lost the election, they got even more aggressive. So I'm going to get into that. But the whole result of this campaign was essentially to line Donald Trump's pockets. And boy, did that succeed. Boy, was that successful. Wow. A new NBC analysis of the campaign findings found that in the 5 weeks following this election, those charged in the Capitol riot increased their political donations a total of 75% compared to the 5 weeks leading up to the election. Interesting. What's interesting is that, of course, many had made very few or no donations at all in previous years, but then began escalating their numbers of contributions as Donald Trump was was busy trying to overturn Joe Biden's electoral victory. So that tells me a couple of things, right? So now, at least this is from my perspective, okay? And I could be wrong about this. It's sort of anecdotal. But I noticed that as the election was ramping up, for example, my comment sections, right? Y'all remember all the people, Trump 2020, Trump's going to win. Sleepy Joe's got no chance. All right. And on social media, they were very arrogant. Okay. He's got no crowds. He's done for. He's got no crowds because of fucking coronavirus, guys. But anyway, there was that absolute arrogance, despite, of course, the disastrous poll numbers and his terrible response to the pandemic, which did him in. Now, look, before coronavirus, I was convinced that Donald Trump, since he had, what they could call a good economy. I don't think it was a good economy at all. But I also was critical as well under the Obama administration for their economic handling and the widening inequality of all that stuff, of course, continued under Donald Trump and actually got even more exacerbated thanks to the Trump tax cuts to the rich. But nonetheless, economists are like, oh, yeah, economy's doing pretty good, I guess. People were generally happy when you look at the polls for the most part with Trump's economics and actually tended to trust him more and the Republican Party more on economics, which always blows my mind. But again, those are polls. They don't necessarily reflect the reality, but do reflect people's thinking. And so that's why we talk about those. It's a really good snapshot into what regular people are thinking, because what you want to do, what you can glean from that is, okay, now we know how they're thinking. How do we get the truth to them? How do we change that, right? How do we get them to understand that the rich are screwing them over, and that the administration, the Trump administration, Republicans are actually terrible when it comes to economics. But anyway, there's that arrogance as well from a lot of Trump voters. They, oh, we're going to win. We're going to crush Sleepy Joe. And up until coronavirus, I was like, hey, there's a good chance that Donald Trump could win re-election. But once coronavirus hit and his disastrous response to it, no, he was done. Absolutely done. Nonetheless, there was that dismissal. I found it very, very interesting and actually kind of reminded me of Clinton supporters a little bit. But at the same time, of course, at that time, it was a shocker to so many that Trump could win. And I believed at that time that he could win. But then, of course, I honestly went back and forth a little bit. All right, I did. And the closer I got, the more concerned I was that, Clinton was going to lose. Right. But Trump supporters, a lot like the I am with her people, could not believe that they could lose, that their person could lose. And to be fair, the Hillary people were backed by establishment media. Establishment media was like, no, there's no way Donald Trump could win this at all. And then they overcompensated afterwards. Nonetheless, the other thing that I noticed here following this loss is that's when they started giving, right? Because the emails, the fundraising emails, were kind of scary. and somewhat hilarious. Yeah, I know it wasn't like Maddie, where's my dollar? Yeah, from the Clinton campaign, but they were pretty aggressive. In fact, one Twitter user, Trump Email, actually documented a lot of these, and that's really interesting. Now, the emails, they said, tended to break down into 7 different categories. One is exclusivity, time sensitivity, scarcity, shaming, Trump knows who you are, community, and even greater degrees of matchy, what they call matchy. Okay. Now, that's not to say that any one email belongs in any single category, he tells the Daily Beast. Many of these messages pull from multiple categories at the same time. And interestingly enough, that same person went back and looked at some of these very same strategies that were in the Trump University like guidebook or something. Okay. Fascinating. It really is interesting. Now, especially, again, getting into how aggressive these emails were. They were jam-packed full of, I think, emotional appeals. And believe it or not, this does work. Here's an example. Congratulations, you are the Trump Patriot of the Week. President Trump was so impressed by your dedication to our movement that he unlocked an exclusive 500% match just for you. I'm counting on you to keep our strong lead over Sleepy Joe. I've asked my team to let me know the moment you step up. Don't let me down. Oh, wow. There's more. There's another one. The president will be receiving an updated donor list soon, and I know he'll be looking for your name. I know you won't let him down. Now, again, campaign emails. This is before the election, and that's already pretty bad. But it ramped. He turns it up to 11. Okay. Here's an example. This is sheer madness. The fake news has tried to keep these unprecedented stories of voter fraud quiet, but it's important for the American people to know the truth. Then it asks for a $5 donation, of course, to help you chip in so that you can find the truth. Yes. There's another one. One says, I have great news with the president's win in North Carolina. This is from allegedly Mike Pence, which, look, we all know that no campaign writes their own emails. It's all like written by aides and staffers and things like that. But nonetheless, this was supposedly from
Mike Pounds.
So, here's what it said. I have great news. The president's win in North Carolina. We proved to the left that no matter what the media says, this election is not over. It's not over till it's over. Except that this was like mid-November at this point. So, yeah, it was over. More. If we don't stand up and fight right now, we will lose our country to the liberal mob forever. Forever and ever. The liberal mob. You don't want that to happen, right? You don't want the liberal mob after you. And you don't want them to win forever. Wow. So these emails, they're insane. And they're the rantings of a madman. A total loser. But again, for his supporters, they worked. They worked like a charm. These people gave so much money because they responded to these emotional appeals. Okay? According to filings, Trump and his aligned groups, including the RNC, by the way, raised $207 million in the first 19 days following the election. That, my friends, is a gigantic haul. Now, one of these donors, and this kind of shows you that it's not necessarily unique donors. These are people that are giving over and over and over and over again. This is one person is James Upmore. Now, he is a 63-year-old man from San Antonio, and first just made a single $250 donation to a Trump PAC between Trump's first run for president and the 2020 election, according to the FEC. Then, after November 3rd, that giving ramped up. On November 15th, the day Trump wrote on Twitter that he would not concede, Upmore made 5 more contributions to the president and his aligned groups. 3 days later, when Trump tweeted, I won the election, voter fraud all over the country, Upmore made 4 more donations. The next day, he made even 4 more donations as Trump attorneys held a news conference that spread wild conspiracies about the vote. And on December 18th, when Trump tweeted at Republican senators to, quote, fight for it, don't let them take it away, Upmore made 6 more contributions. In total, he would make up to 40 contributions to Trump, the RNC, and aligned groups following Trump's loss. Wow. And not only that, but his dedication was shown in other ways. In total, you had, according to, okay, I should say, in addition to the 40 contributions, he also decided to show up to the January 6th, as prosecutors allege, Capitol insurrection. They were in the crowd, he and his son. Yeah. The overall point here, this is scarily effective. I mean, seriously, can you imagine? Giving you a politician so many times after they've lost the election to go, no, I'm going to fight the election that I lost. I mean, not only did it, encourage people to give up their hard-earned money, but it also got them to show up to invade the Capitol building, beat police officers up, what happened to the thin blue line, and then do crime. The same people, of course, complain about Antifa. And by the way, I got something about that later. But overall, it would appear that words and rhetoric matter. And it makes me wonder, it really does. And I don't have a definitive answer to this yet. But I wonder if the president, had he been deplatformed sooner, taken off Twitter, taken off YouTube, taken off Facebook, when he started spotting these conspiracy theories, how effective this would have been, how many people would have showed up to the Capitol had that happen, or, not just him, but all the people that are spreading disinformation actively. Again, I'm not saying I'm for deplatforming in that case, but I'm not saying I'm against it either. I'm just curious if this would have prevented this had they been deplatformed before. And look, I have noticed, I'm sure all of you have as well, that the amount of disinformation going out has vastly decreased since you deplatformed some of these, the former president and others who are spreading this disinformation. So I'm just kind of curious about that. Okay. And again, it's an interesting, complicated, nuanced topic and discussion. And it's something that I haven't come around to 100% one way or the other. I guess right now I'm at the point where there are certain cases where I do believe that, some people should be deplatformed when they're doing dangerous things, saying dangerous things, putting other people in actual danger. But then again, you also have to make sure that, people's opinions are protected, free speech is protected, and that you don't just drive these bad ideas underground, as opposed to quashing these ideas in the free marketplace of ideas. So it is pretty interesting. Okay. And it is a big discussion. Nonetheless, we're going to move on, right? So we got a quote here from Kurt Braddock about this. And he's an assistant professor of public communication at American University and a fellow at its Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab. Now, here's what he said. I think quite simply it shows the effectiveness of Trump's messaging in the weeks leading up to the election and how much his stolen election lie resonated with his base after the election. Trump sold the idea to his followers that not only was the election stolen, but also that it was up to his constituents to help make things right. Another person, John Horgan, runs the Violent Extremism Research Group at Georgia State University. Here's what he said. He said they found the increase of contributions to be unsurprising, partly because Trump had primed his supporters for months. And of course, I remember talking about that. I remember saying that this is like Donald Trump, what he's going to do. He's going to sow this, the seeds of this entire thing by going out there and lying repeatedly, saying the Democrats are going to steal this election. There's massive voter fraud, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't done anything about voter fraud. even though the Trump administration itself had a commission that found no evidence of widespread voter fraud in any elections that were held during that time. And so, again, it didn't matter because facts do not matter to these people. And they continued to, fall for this and to respond to these emails. There's more. He also said Trump successfully convinced many of his followers that unless they acted fast, their very way of life was about to come to an end. Their way of life. They literally believe, because Trump told them to, and because the conservative ecosphere, that we are out to end their way of life. I mean, unless their way of life, of course, is like, discriminating against people based on race, sexual orientation, gender, and all those different things. Well, then, yeah, we're out to end that part. Sure. But, we're not out there trying to destroy these people's lives. We're trying to make everybody's lives a little bit better. But it's twisted, though. Their beliefs and their view of their fellow countrymen is so incredibly twisted. And again, a lot of it comes from propaganda. The whole idea that the whole fact that they are after people who are trans and LGBTQ plus is because they've been told that those people are out to get them, that those people are out to destroy their way of life. And well, of course, it's not true. It's absolutely not true. But to them, they believe it. They believe it. They believe that trans person is going to what? I don't know. Harm their children? No, that's not reality. Trans people are often actually more targeted for violence. They don't do violence. They don't do sexual assault. They're usually the ones that are the victims of this. Same with the gay community as well. And they use the same playbook against them. But they're trying to hold on to this, I don't know, this antiquated worldview that is incredibly discriminatory. Again, you've got people out there like Steven Crowder who just, I think his main thing is he just wants to say the N-word. And a lot of them do. And that's their main thing now. I just want to say the N-word. Oh, and that's, again, that's what a lot of Trump support, unfortunately, I think fervent Trump support boils down to. They just want to do and say these things they used to be able to do so before and can't now. Because it's socially unacceptable. Not that the government's going to come after you for it, but that society no longer tolerates that. That said, he also presented, according to Horgan, a catastrophic scenario whereby if the election was for him lost, his followers would suffer as a result, his followers mostly being people who are generally middle to upper class suburbanites, generally, and usually make more than the people who tend to vote for Democrats. Interesting. He made the action not just imperative, but urgent, convincing his followers that they needed to do everything they could now rather than later to prevent the enemy, liberals essentially, from claiming victory. Not knowing, of course, now that the Trump supporters have become the enemy of literal democracy in this case. So now there's more. They also found that among the first 311 people who faced federal charges after the January 6th riot, about 90 had histories of making political contributions. And the overwhelming majority of them, of course, were made to Trump or as aligned groups and within the past year. Elizabeth Neumann, who was Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention before she left the Trump administration and endorsed his opponent, Biden, said the donor findings reveal a useful proof point to the argument that there were monetary drivers behind the big lie, something that, of course, I had been saying quite a bit whenever I talk about this. Of course, there were monetary incentives. Also, she said, it's a useful quantitative metric for demonstrating the increased level of grievance of Trump supporters post-election. It's another thing that I talk about. Neumann also said she believes that the donor's history could be useful to the Justice Department should it seek to make a seditious conspiracy or incitement to violence case. For example, you could look at, you could apply this to the QAnon shaman. for example. QAnon shaman gave a lot of donations to Donald Trump, but also to Andrew Yang. Hey, that's just what it is, okay? There were even people, of course, who made, donations to Democratic candidates who ended up at the Capitol and ended up giving to Donald Trump. So it is interesting. It is very interesting. In fact, some of those charged, however, in connection with the riot, did make their first political contributions after the election, donating to Trump, RNC, or groups like Trump Make America Great Again Committee. Several more made their first donations to political causes and candidates during the 2020 campaign cycle. Here's what Eric Wilson said. This is a Republican political technologist saying, quote, "I think the thing that's clear is the people who took over the Capitol are not interested in the political process," pointing to an analysis that showed that some people accused in the riot did not vote in the election. They donated to campaigns as their votes had already been cast, revealing that they are only interested in the chaos, not the process. Well, I'm not exactly buying that argument. I think that in a lot of cases, these people didn't trust the process already, and therefore didn't take part in it because they believed that they already lost. I mean, we see some of this on the left too. I mean, I've seen people screaming that everything 100% is completely rigged and that there's absolutely no point to electoral politics. I actually disagree. I disagree strongly with that position. AOC, Bernie the Squad, and others, I think you're an example of how electoral politics is able to be somewhat effective. And before you say, but what have they actually done? We don't have Medicare for all. And that's a fair point. And to that, I point to the fact that they have changed the conversation. I've been doing this show for a long time, since before 2015, somewhere around 2012 is when I started getting into politics. The discussion back during those times is how much austerity can we do? How much austerity can we do? We can't even think about raising the minimum wage. What we need to do is we need to cut Social Security, all that stuff. Benefits are too generous. Government is too big. And we can't do any of these big things. Now that conversation is different. That conversation is now away from deficits and austerity. And I agree that we need to continue to move that conversation to the left. But understand, too, that without more of those types of people in Congress, we're not going to get massive change. And so giving up on the electoral process completely, just as we actually only got our foot in the door, after 40 years of Bernie basically standing on the outside and doing this entire thing alone, is just, I think, in my view, short-sighted. It is. Now, what's also short-sighted to me is ignoring community building, ignoring direct action. We do need that. Ignoring, and not building an outside thing to challenge the establishment, insiders as well, to directly pressure politicians in a positive way to do positive things. I think that's also short-sighted and not effective. I also do think that we need to be a little bit more understanding of the limitations of our system currently has too. There are a lot of politicians that want to do a lot of positive things and would love to do that, but are limited by the system in which they're in, and limited by the numbers they have and the organizations and the general power of the current political establishment. But overall point is, both inside and outside, that's how you win. You don't just focus on one. And also, you don't win by throwing up your hands in defeat. There's that. But anyway, there's one more interesting tidbit here from the Trump side of things. Now, according to an analysis of the donations from Trump supporters, the bulk of the donations went to Trump and his aligned groups. About 75% of the more than 900 such donations funneled there. Part of this, Thomas Zaitzoff, an associate professor of political science at the American University, who studies political violence, said this, that there's this very cynical view that this was just a total cash cow for people to fundraise off of vulnerable folks. Well, I think that's true. I agree with that. And here's the irony, right, about this entire thing, about the fact that you have this group of zealots who have given so much of their money, and not only that, but put their bodies on the line, literally invading the Capitol building to go and put Trump into office for another 4 years and even beyond? Well, is that a lot of the Trump base, a lot of the Trump supporters are now looking at those people and saying, secret Antifa, we knew it. And so they say that it was driven by left-wing groups trying to damage Trump, in which a majority of Trump voters believe, according to a Suffolk University USA Today poll taken last month. So imagine being the most fiercely loyal to Trump. For example, the Muffin Man, Jacob Chansley, giving of their bodies and their bank accounts so much. They are now somehow considered to be, to Trump supporters, left-wing infiltrators and deep state agents. It really is a shining example of really how thick this propaganda bubble is and how completely, absolutely out of touch with reality these people are. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.